Do you know the sound your blood makes when it freezes? That is the White Death. It's minus 30 degrees inside. If I close my eyes now, I am never waking up. We called it nuclear winter, but that sounded too poetic, too scientific. It wasn't poetic. It was a slow, grinding execution. The sun had been weak for months. The ash cloud from the burning cities had risen into the stratosphere, wrapping the earth in a gray shroud. It filtered the sunlight, turning noon into a perpetual twilight. Without the sun, the planet began to lose its heat. Rapidly. I remember the day it truly started. November 14th. I was still living in the subway maintenance room, but the dampness had become unbearable. Water was freezing in the pipes. The rats had stopped moving. I had moved up to the second floor of a sturdy brick apartment building nearby. It had thick walls and small windows. It was a fortress. But fortresses are cold. On November 14th, the temperature outside dropped to 0. By midnight, it was 10 below. By morning, it was 20 below. I woke up because my breath was freezing on my face. I opened my eyes. The room was white. Not from snow. From frost. The moisture in the air had crystallized on the walls, the ceiling, the furniture. My blanket was stiff, frozen solid where my body heat hadn't touched it. I sat up, shivering so violently my teeth clicked together like a machine gun. I looked at the window. It wasn't just frosted over. It was cracked. The thermal stress of the rapid drop had shattered the glass. The wind was howling through the crack, a high-pitched scream that sounded like a dying animal. I checked the thermometer I had scavenged from a hardware store. Minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 33 degrees Celsius. Inside the room. In the old world, this would have been an inconvenience. You would turn up the thermostat. You would start a fire in the fireplace. You would put on a sweater and complain about the gas bill. But there was no gas. The pipelines had depressurized months ago. There was no electricity. The grid was a rusted skeleton. I stood up. My joints creaked. My blood felt like sludge in my veins. I realized then that the cold was different from the hunger. Hunger is a passive pain. You can ignore it for hours. You can distract yourself. The cold is active. It is an assault. It claws at your skin, drills into your bones, and squeezes your heart. It demands attention every single second. I walked to the window to tape up the crack. My fingers were clumsy, numb blocks of meat. I fumbled with the duct tape. I couldn't feel the sticky side. I looked down at the street. The city was unrecognizable. It wasn't just covered in snow. It was encased in ice. The black rain from the first week had frozen into hard, jagged sheets. The cars were indistinguishable mounds of white. And the bodies that had been lying in the streets since the panic, they were preserved now, frozen in time. I saw a man sitting on a park bench across the street. He looked like he was sleeping. He was wearing a light jacket. He hadn't moved in 3 weeks. He was a statue of ice. I pulled away from the window. I had to think. The brain slows down in the cold. It wants to hibernate. It tells you, just lie down. Just close your eyes for a minute. It's warm in your dreams. That is the voice of the White Death. If you listen to it, you die. I needed heat. But I couldn't burn the furniture. Not yet. If I started a fire in the middle of the room, the smoke would kill me. If I opened the window for ventilation, the heat would escape instantly. The apartment was too big. The ceiling was too high. I was trying to heat 500 square feet with one human body. It was impossible physics. I had to change the equation. I didn't need to heat the apartment. I only needed to heat me. I spent the next 4 hours building the igloo. I dragged the mattress off the bed and into the smallest room, a walk-in closet in the hallway. No windows. Central location. The closet was tiny. Maybe 4 feet by 6 feet. This was good. Small volume means less air to heat. I went to the other apartments on the floor. I kicked in doors. I didn't care about noise anymore. The cold had killed the looters too. The gangs were huddled in their basements, freezing just like me. I raided every linen closet I could find. Wool blankets, down comforters, heavy curtains, rugs. I brought them all back to my closet. I lined the floor with 3 layers of rugs. The floor is a heat sink. It will suck the warmth right out of your feet. You have to insulate from the bottom up. Then I lined the walls. I used duct tape and nails to hang heavy velvet curtains against the drywall. Finally, the ceiling. I draped a heavy duvet over the clothes rod, creating a low, tent-like structure inside the closet. It was a nest. A soft, suffocating nest. I crawled inside. It was dark. Pitch black. I had a battery-powered lantern, but I saved it. I sat on the mattress, wrapped in 4 layers of clothing. Thermal underwear, scavenged from a sporting goods store. Jeans. Sweatpants over the jeans. 2 t-shirts. A wool sweater. A ski jacket. 2 pairs of wool socks. A beanie hat. I looked like a shapeless mound of fabric. But within 20 minutes I felt it. Warmth. My body was a furnace, generating about 100 watts of heat energy constantly. In the big room, that heat dissipated into the air and vanished. Here, in the igloo, the heat was trapped. The blankets reflected it back to me. The rugs stopped it from escaping into the floor. I checked the thermometer. Outside the closet, in the apartment, minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the closet, plus 45 degrees Fahrenheit. A 75-degree difference. Created solely by insulation and biology. I was alive. But then, the dampness returned. When you breathe in a small, cold space, you exhale water vapor. That vapor hit the cold walls of my tent and turned to liquid. By evening, the blankets were damp. If they got wet, they would lose their insulation value. Wet wool is okay. Wet cotton is a death sentence. I had to manage the moisture. I had to vent the tent every few hours, letting the precious heat escape to dry out the air. It was a constant battle. Too much heat equals sweat equals wet clothes equals freezing. Too little heat equals hypothermia. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside the building. I realized that this was my life now. I was an animal hibernating in a cave of polyester and duck feathers. I thought about the people who didn't know this. The people who were trying to heat entire houses with a single wood stove. They would run out of wood in a week. The people who were sleeping in their cars. The metal would freeze them by morning. The people who were wearing cotton jeans and sneakers. They would lose their toes to frostbite before the sun went down. Knowledge was heat, and ignorance was freezing to death. I was warm, but I was thirsty. My water supply was in the kitchen, frozen solid. I had 5 gallons of water in plastic jugs. They were now 5 gallons of ice blocks. I couldn't drink ice. Eating snow lowers your core body temperature, accelerating hypothermia. You have to melt it. To melt it, I needed fire. To have fire, I needed fuel. And to get fuel, I had to leave the igloo. I looked at the flap of the blanket door. Beyond it lay the apartment. The outside. The killing zone. I had to go out there. I had to hunt for wood. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the shock. I pushed the blanket aside. The cold hit me like a physical punch to the face. My survival timer had started ticking again. I stepped out of the blanket fort into the living room. The temperature was minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit. It felt like walking onto the surface of Mars. The air was so dry it instantly sucked the moisture from my eyes. I had to blink rapidly to keep them from freezing shut. I needed fuel. I needed to melt the ice in my water jugs. If I didn't drink soon, dehydration would thicken my blood, making frostbite inevitable. It's a cruel cycle. You need water to stay warm, but you need heat to get water. I looked at the furniture. The sofa. No. Synthetic foam. It would release cyanide gas if I burned it. The curtains. I had already used them for insulation. The dining table. It was solid oak. Heavy. Hard. Perfect. I didn't have an axe. I had a hammer and a pry bar. I attacked the table. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the silent apartment like a gunshot. Asterisk, crack. Snap. Asterisk. I broke off a leg. Then another. I was sweating under my layers. Panic spike. Sweat kills. I forced myself to stop, to breathe, to unzip my jacket for a minute to let the heat escape. I couldn't afford to get damp. I dragged the wood to the center of the room. I had cleared a space on the concrete subfloor. I had ripped up the carpet earlier for insulation. I built a small fire ring using bricks from a decorative fireplace that didn't work. But oak is hard to start. You need kindling. I looked at the bookshelf. My neighbor was a reader, a collector. First editions, history books, encyclopedias, the sum of human knowledge. I picked up a copy of the History of the Roman Empire. Leather-bound, heavy. I ripped out the pages. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silence. I crumpled the pages, the fall of Caesar, the burning of Rome, and shoved them under the oak leg. I lit the match. The paper caught instantly. I watched history burn. It didn't feel like sacrilege. It felt like survival. The Romans were dead. I was alive. And right now, Caesar was worth more as a BTU, British thermal unit, than as an emperor. The fire grew. The oak caught. A beautiful orange flame danced in the darkroom. I huddled over it, my hands extended. The heat was intoxicating. It was a drug. I placed a metal pot full of snow and ice on the makeshift grill I had fashioned from an oven rack. I watched the ice melt. Slowly. Painfully slowly. It took 20 minutes to get a cup of water. I drank it hot. It scalded my throat, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. But the fire was hungry. It ate the table leg in an hour. It ate the second leg in 45 minutes. It ate the history of Rome in 10 minutes. I realized the math was against me. To keep this fire going for a night, I would need an entire forest. I didn't have a forest. I had one apartment. When the table was gone, I would burn the chairs. Then the floorboards. Then the door frames. And when the wood was gone, I looked at the fire dying down. I looked at the shadows dancing on the wall. They looked like ghosts. The ghosts of everyone who had frozen to death before they could find a match. I let the fire die. I poured the remaining hot water into a thermos bottle I had found. I retreated back to my igloo. I couldn't maintain a fire 24/7. It was too expensive. I would only burn the world when I needed to drink. Day 40. Or maybe day 50. The cold had become a character in the story. A silent, patient villain. I went out scavenging. I needed food. My tuna was gone. I wore every piece of clothing I owned. I wrapped my feet in plastic bags over my socks to keep the slush out. I walked down the street. The snow was 5 feet deep. I had to walk on the roofs of the buried cars. The silence was absolute. No wind today. Just the stillness of a crypt. I saw something near the entrance of a subway station. A body. But this one was different. It was a man. He was dead. Frozen solid. But he wasn't bundled up. He was naked. His clothes, a heavy parka, wool pants, boots, were scattered in the snow around him in a wide circle. He was lying on his back, shirtless, barefoot, his skin blue and marble white. He had a smile on his face. A peaceful, serene smile. I stopped. I stared. I knew what this was. Paradoxical undressing. It happens in the final stages of severe hypothermia. When your body temperature drops below 85 degrees, the muscles that constrict your blood vessels to keep heat in your core, they fail. They exhaust themselves. Suddenly, all the hot blood from your core rushes to your skin. You don't feel cold anymore. You feel hot. Burning hot. You feel like you are on a tropical beach. You feel like you are on fire. So, in your final moments of delirium, you strip. You take off your jacket, your boots, your shirt. You throw them away, desperate to cool down. And then you lie down in the snow, comfortable and warm, and you go to sleep. It is the siren song of the White Death. It tricks you into killing yourself. I looked at the man's face. He looked happy. He had died dreaming of summer. I felt a sudden wave of heat flush through my own chest. Panic seized me. Is it happening to me? I ripped off my glove and touched my face. Cold. Ice cold. I checked my armpits. Warm. I wasn't dying. Not yet. But the fear was cold enough to freeze my heart. I looked at the man's scattered clothes. The parka was high quality. Down-filled. The boots were sorrel. Rated for -40 degrees. He didn't need them anymore. I walked over to the clothes. I felt like a vulture. A grave robber. But shame is a luxury for the warm. I picked up the parka. I shook the snow off it. I picked up the boots. I put them in my pack. Thank you, I whispered to the smiling, naked corpse. I hope it was warm where you went. I walked back to my apartment building. My toes were numb. Not the my foot is asleep numb. The I can't feel where my foot ends and the boot begins numb. Frostbite. Stage 1. I had to get back to the igloo. I had to rewarm. If I didn't, I would lose the toes. And if I lost my toes, I couldn't walk. And if I couldn't walk, I couldn't scavenge. And if I couldn't scavenge, I would end up like the smiling man. I ran. Or I tried to run. I shuffled through the deep snow. The cold was nipping at my heels like a pack of wolves. I made it to the lobby. The door was frozen shut. I kicked it. Once. Twice. It shattered. I crawled inside. I didn't stop until I was back in my closet, under the duvet, shaking uncontrollably. I rubbed my feet for an hour. The pain of the blood returning was excruciating. It felt like needles of fire. I screamed into my pillow. But the pain was good. Pain meant the nerves were still alive. Pain meant I wasn't the smiling man yet. I don't know exactly when the winter broke. Calendars don't exist in the dark. I had spent months living like a mole, sleeping 18 hours a day to conserve calories, moving only to melt snow or empty my waste bucket. But one morning, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in an eternity. It wasn't the wind howling. It wasn't the cracking of frozen wood. It was a rhythmic, gentle tapping. Asterisk plop. 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 Asterisk. I sat up in my nest of blankets. The air didn't bite my face. It felt heavy. Damp. I crawled out of the closet. The apartment was gray, illuminated by a different kind of light coming through the window. Water was dripping from the ceiling where a pipe had burst months ago and formed an icicle. The icicle was weeping. I walked to the window. I wiped the condensation off the glass. Outside, the white world was turning gray. The temperature had risen. It was maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Above freezing. The great thaw had begun. I should have felt joy. I should have cheered. The sun was trying to push through the ash clouds, a pale, watery disk in the sky. But looking down at the street, I didn't feel joy. I felt horror. The snow was retreating. And as it pulled back, it revealed what it had been hiding. The mounds of white snow turned into cars. And the statues, the frozen people on the benches, the bodies in the streets, they were appearing again. Winter is clean. Ice preserves things. It makes the dead look like they are sleeping. But spring is messy. Spring is when the rot begins. I saw a movement across the street. A door opened in the apartment building opposite mine. A figure stepped out. Then another. Survivors. They looked like me. Gaunt. Pale. Their eyes sunken deep into their skulls. They were wrapped in layers of dirty rags and mismatched furs. We looked at each other across the melting slush of the street. No one waved. No one smiled. We just stared. We were the ones who hadn't frozen. We were the ones who had burned our furniture, who had slept in closets, who had stolen coats from the dead. We were the winter-born. I realized then that the cold had been a filter. A cruel, Darwinian filter. The weak were gone. The unprepared were gone. The ones who waited for the government to save them were gone. Only the stubborn remained. I turned away from the window. I looked at my apartment. The floor was scarred with burn marks. The furniture was gone, turned into ash. The walls were stripped of curtains. It was a ruin. But it was a warm ruin. I packed my bag. The boots I had taken from the smiling man were on my feet. They fit perfectly. I had survived the fire. I had survived the radiation. I had survived the ice. But as the smell of wet earth and decaying flesh began to rise from the street, I knew the next challenge was already here. Disease. The cold had paused the biology of death. The heat would restart it. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The first winter was over. But the long, hard years were just beginning.